Welcome to the release notes for Alyvix 3.1.0. Our latest release of Alyvix includes 3 important new features and 3 big improvements. The first new feature is that measures are now reported for test case objects each time they are executed rather than only once. It's also much faster now to run test case objects either singly or in small groups without having to run the entire script. Third, you can now re-grab a screen capture of a test case object without deleting it, and you can grab an existing test case object at a different screen resolution. We've also improved the organization of argument passing with Alyvix Robot, added user interface controls to ease managing your scripts, and improved the dialog boxes that you use for confirming and canceling actions. So now let's look at the first new feature. Whether you run your test cases in Alyvix Editor or in Alyvix Robot, the output measures will now report each time a test case object is run, regardless of how many times it does so. Here we'll set up an example where a series of strings will be sent to Notepad as part of a loop. We'll quickly create our test case object using the icon as an anchor, and also requiring a menu item to confirm that we have the correct window. Next, we'll create a map which will loop over a set of keys and values. The actual names we use aren't important. Let's output the values from the map just to be sure that the test case is actually running. We'll set the click point in the text field, and in the string field, we'll insert the 1 parameter that refers to the current iteration value from the map. Finally, we'll set up the loop script. In previous versions of Alyvix, if we were to run a test case object more than once, whether in the script or within a loop based on a map like this, then the measurements for each test case object would only appear once. Now when we run the test case, you can see in the output that the results are reported 2 times, one for each key in the map. The next great new feature is that you can now test individual test case objects, or test small groups of test case objects, without disabling and later re-enabling all the other script nodes that you don't want to test. Let's look at how this can improve a typical workflow when you're creating or debugging a test case. Test cases usually have multiple steps, where each one depends on the result of the previous one. So let's create a test case like that with 3 steps, where Alyvix will navigate through a series of web pages. Now at this point, we'll run our new test case the normal way, using the Run button. It does the first action, so now the browser is in a different state, and if we were to rerun the test case now, it wouldn't work. When setting up each test case object, it's really inefficient to reset the website to the original page, and then run the entire script just to test the last one you've added. So best practice was to just disable the other scripting nodes. Here we'll use one of the UI improvements in 3.1.0 to quickly add a new scripting node. And then, following past best practice, we'll disable the first scripting node so we don't have to reset to the initial state when we test it. Next, we'll add a third test case object beginning from the results of the second one, which will navigate from the third web page to the fourth. Each time we add a new navigation action, we end up disabling the current scripting node and adding a new node, as you can see here. Now you no longer need to disable nodes. You can just select the play button in Selector to run that test case object all by itself. So this testing pattern of disable, run, is now much simpler. You can also test a subset of scripting nodes by using multi-select and then pressing the Run Selection button in the scripting panel, and Alyvix will run them all in sequence. Finally, just like a single test case object, you can run an entire single section all by itself. Here, we remove the last 2 scripting nodes from the main script and put them into a new section. Then, we just press the play button for that section, which will run every test case object that it contains. And that's 3 ways you can now run 1 or more test case objects without having to disable and re-enable scripting nodes all the time. And here's our third great new feature. Every time you create a new test case object, it captures the screen so you can create components. But what happens when a change is later made to the interface or its content? If you rerun the test case, it will no longer match. The regrabbing feature allows you to update the screen capture to the current screen, helping you to easily update the test case object without losing the entire component tree and all the options that you had set. You can even use regrabbing to quickly adapt an existing test case object to a similar situation by duplicating it in Selector and then modifying it. The regrabbing feature will also let you change the screen resolution and then capture the screen at that new resolution as well. Let's start by creating a simple interface. We'll use the Notepad editor as an example, just because it's so easy to change the content in a text editor. To set it up, we'll create a selection and subselections, change their component type to text, make the mouse move to the target, make sure the regular expression is correct, shorten the timeout, and then add this test case object to the scripting panel and run it to check that it works. Of course it works. But now let's change the interface so that it stops working. It's enough to change hello to world. When we rerun it, it fails this time. We can see why in the console tab. The second text subselection fails because we changed the word to something that no longer matches the regular expression. So now it's time to regrab the screen. Press the grab button, then check that our selection and subselections don't need to be changed, and adjust the content, in this case our regular expression, so that it matches again. Now when we rerun the test case, it will match the new content. The other functionality of the grab button is to capture additional screen resolutions. For instance, our current screen is Full HD 1920 by 1080. If we change the display resolution, or copy the Alyvix file to a new computer and run it there, we can use the grab button to get the screen capture at that resolution. At first we can see that our original resolution is the only one available. But now that we've changed our display settings, pressing the grab button will capture the screen again, and we will then be able to see it in the list of available resolutions. Here, 1680 by 1050 is now also listed. That's it for the new features. Now let's turn to the improvements. There are many more improvements and bug fixes in Alyvix 3.1.0 than the 3 listed here, but these are the most important. One of the things we've improved is the argument structure for Alyvix Robot. You can now use a common way of passing multiple elements to Alyvix Robot, whether from the CLI or from a map, and we've also provided for a default argument for cases when the CLI command doesn't contain enough elements. Here's an example where we pass two arguments via the CLI using the -a parameter. If we look at the main script, there's a loop command where each argument gets processed. If those arguments are strings to be inserted, the default element, here it's the string OK separated by the comma, will be inserted whenever there aren't enough arguments. Our next improvement is the addition of multiple interface controls to simplify script management. Hover confirmation, new action controls, and multi-select. This includes showing a blue bar indicating which scripting node you're hovering over, and 3 action controls in Selector for running that object independently, to add it to the bottom of the scripting node, and to drag it to the appropriate place in the scripting panel. You can also make multiple selections and use the actions at the bottom left of the scripting node panel to run them, disable them, or remove them. The insert and the drag and drop action controls are also available for each map and section object once created. Finally, we've improved the user experience in the interface. One example is the improvement of dialog boxes when confirming and canceling actions. Here, for instance, is the dialog box for removing a scripting node. So that's been a look at the major new features and improvements for release 3.1.0 of Alyvix. Of course, there's also a large number of other smaller improvements and bug fixes under the hood. To see them, please take a look at the written release notes in the newly updated user guide. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch with us.